Welcome on in. This is the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. John McKechnie and Mario Puig here. Today we are breaking down some running back battles. We're almost to the end of preseason. We are just a few weeks away from NFL season kickoff. So we got to figure out which of these backfields are the ones to target, some handcuff options to fade, things of that nature. Let's go ahead and start the show. Welcome on in. John McKechnie, Mario Puig, hanging out with you on today's edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Today, it's all about the backfields. We're talking running back situations that are particularly heavily weighted for fantasy purposes. A lot of ones that have been tricky to figure out, and that's obviously reflected in the market for a lot of these teams. So we're going to figure out, is the player drafted the highest of a certain running back group? Are they worth it at ADP? Or if not, which of the backups are the ones to target? So, Mario, let's go ahead and just get right into it. I want to start in Philadelphia because I feel like we have yet to really set the record straight on this Philly backfield. Maybe since they got Rashaad Penny earlier in the offseason. I don't know if we fully unpacked it after they went ahead and got DeAndre Swift during the draft as well. So we have those guys in the fold. There's also Kenneth Gainwell going much later. DeAndre Swift, like a 7th round pick generally in underdog best ball, maybe a little bit later now. And Rashaad Penny somewhere in the 10th, 11th type of round. So just go ahead and give us the explainer, give us the primer on what your approach is when it comes to this Philadelphia backfield.
Well, this has gotten a little more complicated recently. I guess it's been about 2 weeks now that most Philadelphia Eagles beat writers have observed Kenneth Gainwell getting the most first-team work in practice, and therefore are concluding, for understandable reasons that I don't believe, but understandable enough that they'd conclude, oh, Gainwell must be kind of the starter then. And that it could be true, I guess. It seems highly unlikely to me. The main reason I think it's highly unlikely is that Gainwell is objectively nowhere near as talented as DeAndre Swift or Rashaad Penny, and particularly as a runner, a pure runner, Gainwell literally might be like half as good as Penny. Like Penny behind an offensive line like this could average, over significant volume, mind you, Penny could average 7+ yards per carry, something like that. And we've already seen Gainwell play 2 years with the Eagles, and both of them were favorable circumstances. I liked Gainwell as a prospect out of Memphis quite a bit. He was a great player there, really stood out as a pass catcher in particular. And that is, I think, kind of why the Eagles have to throw him a bone this time of the year, because there's no pass catching room in this offense from the running back position. And you have, particularly the way that the Eagles run Jalen Hurts and set up the run structure for him, it's at the expense of the infrastructure that would go toward running back targets. So Gainwell's best trait doesn't even have room to manifest in this offense. And that doesn't mean they, don't have a use for him. It just means he's a backup. And they might, on some level, recognize, he's a little bit overqualified in the sense that he could be catching 50 passes on some other team that isn't ours. So we don't want to alienate him. We don't want to discourage the hard work that he's doing. They probably like him as a culture guy. I mean, it's not common that you see a player as young as him take on the volume and just trust level that Memphis gave him. So he's probably a totally standout culture guy. A player you want on your team, and you want the players on your team to be more like, basically. So when you see, I would also imagine Boston Scott is like this, because they've made a point of keeping 4 running backs just to keep that guy around the last 2 years. And that's the other thing, 4 running backs. So it's one thing for the Eagles to give Gainwell first team reps in training camp. It's another for them to let that indicate anything about their actual long-term depth chart plans. And especially if they're keeping 4 running backs, what does it matter to them what unit each guy is running with. Like they know what Penny can do. They know what Swift can do. They traded a 4th round pick for Swift, so they're not just going to put him on the bench. What this looks like to me is a combination of like trying to demonstrate and still earn it culture, show to the team, hey, just because we traded for Swift, just because we signed Penny, just because Penny was a 1st round pick and Swift was a 2nd rounder, just because they were both, big stars wherever they were before, that doesn't mean anything to us because we're about earning it here. We're about, proving yourself within our culture here. And so that's one thing that it could be is, as far as why Swift and Penny might not be getting as many first team reps as Gainwell. And it's something that will change over time. It's like Swift and Penny will eventually start getting more. And when the games start for real, when the real bullets start flying, the Eagles are quite simply left with the question of, do you want to give these carries to the players who will get you the most yards, or does something else matter to you more than that? And they're free to make that conclusion. No one can stop them from saying like, well, we don't care about the actual returns as much as some other thing that we have in mind. But that's the trade-off. You cannot, as Kenneth Gainwell, run as well as Rashaad Penny and DeAndre Swift for physical limitation reasons, if only. Like Gainwell is 200 flat, 5'8", running a 4.5 flat. So that a player with those traits cannot keep up with someone like Rashaad Penny, who's running a 4.46 at 220, or Swift, who's 4.48 at 212. You can't keep up with them. They can go from point A to point B faster. The production, especially Penny, his production in his career has shown he's got as good a vision as anybody in the league. He's a totally lethal kick returner at San Diego State, in addition to averaging almost 8 yards a carry there. So Penny is bigger, faster, sees the field as well as anybody. There is no possible way that Gainwell can match him as a runner. So I think it's pretty clear, like Gainwell could be the hurry up guy. That's something for Swift to worry about maybe. But if there's carries to go around, it's Swift and Penny. There's no question that they're the best options. It's 100% not debatable.
So I guess my thinking when it comes to this Eagles backfield, I have a decent amount of Rashaad Penny. I haven't really drafted Swift much at all since he got traded. I haven't gotten a lot of Penny like this summer, like probably from July onward. But I think and I have drafted a decent amount of Gainwell, but this was a different discussion essentially of just a few weeks ago where Gainwell was someone going in like the Gus Edwards zone, like 15th, 16th round.
Later even, I think, yeah.
So I was fine with getting shares of Gainwell then because my presupposition for it was essentially Rashaad Penny and DeAndre Swift, yes, they're better players, but they get hurt a lot. Maybe there's a way that Kenneth Gainwell, just by injury happenstance on the Eagles backfield, like I basically it's a simple equation of like opportunity for some volume and a cheap draft price was enough for me on Gainwell. But when you're talking about him in the 13th round, like you are now, there needs to be a little bit more.
We did this last year.
Right.
You remember that? Yeah. Like, I admittedly fell for this a little bit because relative to Miles Sanders, I actually am, a Gainwell truther. So last year there was that hype of, looks like Gainwell could be taking first team reps from Sanders. And it just turned out to be absolutely nothing at all. 100% nothing at all. So I like you have mostly taken Penny of the group, and admittedly, it's a lot easier to justify any of these guys in best ball than it is in redraft. Because in redraft, you don't need one of the other three to get hurt, but to go into your weekend with any sort of clarity on your starting options, you kind of do. Because if all three of those guys are healthy, it's 3 wild cards. It's like I don't know the actual probability of guessing that right, but it can't be that good, and you're kind of just buying a ticket to a ride, and you don't know where it's going. If you have to roll with those guys and redraft when all 3 are healthy. So primarily drafting best ball, it's been easy for me to justify taking Penny. He's not I would doubt anyway that he's like a top 5 most owned runner, but for me, but it's probably pretty close. And like you said, it was probably like the 11th, 12th round. I think I was taking him before I don't know if it was the draft. I can't remember when he signed with the Eagles, but I feel like I took Penny a decent amount before he signed with the Eagles. like way back earlier in the offseason. So that might have been why I slowed down a little bit, because his ADP jumped like 3 or 4 rounds once he did sign with the Eagles. But it's not because I'm averse to taking him now. If I'm not taking Penny now, it's more like someone took him before me, before I had the chance to, or I just am too specifically going at a different position in that part of the ADP, something like that. I'm definitely not afraid of Rashaad Penny in best ball, even with all this doom and gloom. I'm sorry, material reality matters a lot. And the talent with him, I don't know why we still have to have this argument with people, but it's like, you cannot argue that Rashaad Penny is anything less than a top 10 pure runner in the NFL. And I would be absolutely shocked if the Eagles have no interest in that.
I feel hacky saying it, but yeah, it all when it comes to Penny, it just comes down to like, is he healthy or not? Because when he is, like you said, the returns are indisputable. That guy is a total beast. It's just a matter of is
like
he
a
going
truly
to give you...
elite runner? It's like to not take that easy free yardage as the Eagles is inconceivable to me.
So I think that he'll end up paying off. Do you think that Swift pays off as an 8th round guy?
Well, with Swift, my only concern is the price. Really, I'm not so much. I am not specifically saying Penny will outproduce Swift. I don't really want to mess with that proposition at all. I have no idea which way the specifics are going to go. It's just when Penny is 2 to 3 rounds cheaper, that makes the decision for me. If Swift were going in the 11th and Penny in the 8th, I might have exactly as much Swift as I do Penny, and I'd have maybe as much Penny as I do Swift, which is to say not much at all. I don't know if I have more than like 2 or 3 teams with Swift on them. So it's not because I want to fade Swift. It's because I'm obviously high on Penny. And with that said, if Penny were hurt, Swift is definitely the best Eagles runner. As much as I'm talking about Penny being the best Eagles runner, Swift is very good as a pure runner. He's good as a pass catcher too. It's similarly to Penny. It's only the scaling up of volume that's the question, because of durability reasons. But if Penny is for some reason unavailable or whatever, Swift, he could average 6 yards a carry in that offense.
Yeah, the offense in and of itself is going to move the ball on the ground at will, and probably through the air at will as well. I only have 1 Swift share. I just checked. Whereas at Penny, I have him on about 10% of my roster. So
I probably have a little more than that. I'm probably like at 20 or something like that, which is conventionally a high exposure rate by big portfolio player standards.
Hey, I mean, you're the Penny guy, man. So it'd be weird if you were like under 10%. Yeah, you got to go. It's in the bylaws. Let's get on over to our next backfield. But before then, we got a message from our friends over at Fantrax. For you fantasy football players out there, is there something you wish your fantasy league had, or features that are missing from your current leagues? Bonus scoring, custom schedules or playoffs, deeper team settings? Well, look no further, because we have you covered with our friends at Fantrax. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. Create or join a fantasy football commissioner league, invite your friends, and dominate your draft this season. Fantrax is the top dynasty football platform in the industry. Also, top dog in college fantasy football, in the midst of one more college fantasy football slow draft as we speak. Got Brock Bowers, as I, of course, did. Coming from another service? Not a problem. Fantrax can easily import any of your current leagues and rosters and customize if needed. Ever trade go wrong or make a mistake in dropping a player? Fantrax has commissioner tools that allow you to undo any move with one simple click. Is there anything lacking in your current fantasy league manager? Fantrax likely has it. Fantrax is running a special promotion that you don't want to miss. Sign up for free at fantrax.com/RotoWire today to enter for your chance to win tickets to any regular season game, NFL game, that is, for you and your entire league, plus $6,000 in spending cash. That's right. Tickets for your entire league. Simply create a new league or bring over your existing leagues for more chances to win. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Again, that's fantrax.com/RotoWire. All right, let's get to our next backfield. And I think that this is one that's interesting. It's the backfield that Rashaad Penny just left this offseason, but they've rebolstered, obviously, through the draft with the addition of Zach Charbonnet. I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker has been, it just sort of hard. How would you describe the Kenneth Walker market since the start of training camp? With the injury and everything holding him out, it feels like there's been a bit of a freeze, maybe a cooling on his market a little bit. And do you think that Zach Charbonnet catches up in your rankings and projections? Do you still like Kenneth Walker as a 5th round guy? Do you still like Zach Charbonnet as like an 8th round guy? That's a pretty close gap between the two of them. Your thoughts here?
Well, I had zero interest in Kenneth Walker back when he was going in the 2nd round, which he was early in the offseason. Then, of course, the draft happened. Not just Zach Charbonnet, but even Kenny McIntosh, a conceivable issue for Walker. And it's been a fall, like you said, to like the 5th round. And then I guess it might have gotten a little worse yet since that groin injury that he came down with early in training camp. So I'm looking at the NFFC, the RotoWire Online Championship NFFC from the past 4 days. And granted, actually, this is a pretty good sample size, 22 drafts. And Kenneth Walker has fallen to the 60th spot in the ADP. I don't know how the standard deviation of some of these picks might be kind of high. Like, for instance, Javonte Williams is ahead of Kenneth Walker in this at 58, but that's because one person took him at 42. And I don't know how many, goofy picks like that are kind of throwing off the average. Maybe the median would be a little different looking, but behind Javonte Williams is a pretty big drop because Williams had been going around like the 8th, 9th. And granted, the improved news around Javonte Williams, his knee recovery, that explains some of it, but man, that's a pretty high shifting range for the two players. And Walker, I think, can keep going down. He's 2 picks ahead of J.K. Dobbins in the order, and I've taken Dobbins over Walker like 10 times. So that's, I guess, to answer how high I actually am on Walker. Not as high as Dobbins. Whatever. Even though I find the price palatable for Walker in the 5th round, I'm still not really doing that my own. Maybe that's wrong. I don't want to fade the talent. I think Walker is a totally good player, but I am also quite high on Charbonnet. I don't do that thing that people do where they try to make like an out of 10 scale and grade prospects. But if I tried to do that, I probably would have had Charbonnet ranked higher than Walker as prospects. So between the two, it's a little bit, again, like the DeAndre Swift, Rashaad Penny thing. The question of which one is actually better is something that I don't even really ask myself when the price difference is like that. In this case, upwards of like 4.5 rounds. Although we'll see if Walker keeps slipping. I mean, if that margin gets smaller, I'm not going to lose, I'm not going to lose the faith with Charbonnet. But if I see Walker in the 6th round, that's going to be tough to pass up, even though I might even then feel a little icky about it. At this point, I can't even convince myself that Walker is definitely better than someone like Dameon Pierce. So that's why I get a little bit anxious about it. But if the carries are there, Walker is going to take it a good distance. He's no bum or anything.
Do we think that there's room in this offense for both of them to come close to returning value at their ADP?
Just Charbonnet, I think. I mean, if Walker comes through in the 5th round, it's because he did decisively hold off Charbonnet as a runner. It would have to be, as a pass catcher, that's not really on the table for Walker. And as a runner, I don't know what you'd need. You'd almost need like a 2/3, 1/3 kind of split, maybe. I don't know if 55-45 does it for Walker at ADP, and that's a real risk.
Yeah, that's how I've been approaching it, and therefore I've been much more in on getting Charbonnet. And to be clear, it's not always the case that just taking the cheaper guy is better. But when the talents are essentially equal, then you can play that ADP game. And I think that Charbonnet is just as good, maybe even better than Walker as a prospect. So I have 20% Charbonnet. I'll continue to acquire shares. I just think he's the real deal, and
I'm heavily invested. Yeah.
Hell yeah. So, I mean, as good as Kenneth Walker is and can be, I think he's well above average running back. I just feel like Charbonnet, one of the best in this class, and certainly someone that I think has the skill set to really transfer over nicely to this level. So I'm going to continue to just Charbonnet is going to be my stock answer anytime that Seattle's backfield's brought up.
Yeah, same here, and not to cast any gloom over us Charbonnet truthers or for the Walker truthers, but we really can't totally count out Kenny McIntosh, in my opinion. If it was DJ Dallas, who's their so-called pass catching specialist, I'd be like, who cares? That guy sucks. But McIntosh is a little different than Dallas. He's got real proven high efficiency, high volume pass catching ability. So if there's some way for it to somehow go wrong for both Walker and Charbonnet, it would be something like McIntosh taking, 20 snaps a game on which he could draw 4 targets or something really quick like that.
So with McIntosh, is he someone that you'd consider like 20th round on DraftKings best ball?
There's that thing again where it's everything is permitted. Some of these week 17, week 16 running backs who play and determine a lot of fantasy championships because the starter on their team got hurt. There are worse players than Kenny McIntosh who end up on that list over the years. So I can't say don't take him, but I'd have to be putting up like thousands of dollars in best ball entries, which I don't. So I'd have to have incredible exposure to a lot of players before I'd start getting to the point of hedging with McIntosh. Although it could be the right answer. If he gets snaps, he will catch passes. There's 100% certainty in that. It's just hard to see how he would get snaps.
And then tangentially, when it comes to Seattle, I mean, the big story there this week being Jackson Smith and Jigba having that wrist injury. So where are you on Metcalf and Lockett? Do you see either of them climbing up? I feel like Lockett is more the guy that's going to move up fairly considerably. I think I don't know how much more room there is for Metcalf to move up though.
Yeah, Metcalf is maxed out, and I guess I hadn't maybe seen the latest news on Smith and Jigba. He's out for week 1 pretty much, but we don't know beyond that.
I think he hasn't even gotten the surgery yet. As of Thursday morning is the last I looked. So if that's the case, and we're just a couple of weeks away from kickoff, I'm guessing that we could be waiting until later September. I am not a doctor, but I'm concerned about that when it comes to Jackson Smith and Jigba, and a different injury, but he had a hamstring injury last year that basically kept him out for the entire year. That happened in week 1, so I'm starting to worry about the durability a little bit here.
Well, I feel better about a broken bone than I do tissue injuries or ligament injuries. So because Smith and Jigba is polished, I think he'll be plug and play whenever he's healthy. I'm not really worried about him coming back rusty or, coming back and then being like, well, you need to get him more reps in practice. Like, he's ready to go. That's one thing that was clear about him as a prospect is like, he's definitely a natural slot receiver. Like he's just kind of born to do it. So I think he'll be ready to go whenever he gets back. But yeah, as far as whether it's week 2 or 4, I guess I have no clue. Don't really know how to factor that in to his ADP. But if Smith and Jigba's out for 3 weeks or something, I don't know if that's enough for me to really move up Lockett a whole lot, because I looked at it as Lockett would be on the field for at least 80% of the snaps anyway. I didn't see Smith and Jigba as someone who was going to take Lockett and put him on the bench. What was on the table was that Smith and Jigba puts one of those 3 good tight ends on the bench a little bit more than they were last year. So whereas in this Rams game especially, what you're just going to see is about 110 snaps for those 3 tight ends, and then Lockett and Metcalf are going to play almost every single snap for receiver. And the difference would have been if Smith and Jigba were healthy for that game. Maybe the tight ends don't play 110 snaps. Maybe they play 90 or 100 or something. And that's the difference. They're going to run more while Smith and Jigba's out. They're going to maybe go a little bit slower paced because they don't have wide receiver depth to put on the field. If they go up tempo with Metcalf and Lockett as their top two receivers, and one of those two gets gassed, then the next receiver up is bad enough to kind of make the whole offense shaky. So I think they want to keep the game a little bit slower, keep the offense closer to like 55 snaps than 70, and lean on Walker, lean on Charbonnet, make those tight ends play a lot. That's how they're going to get through it. So Lockett, I think, doesn't really stand to benefit that much from Smith and Jigba's absence, but I also don't know how many people looked at Lockett all this time and projected, playing time uncertainty on the basis of Smith and Jigba. I never believed that, so this doesn't change that much for me.
Okay, all right. Well said there, and sort of preempting. Let's say JSN is out for week 1. Just a hard no on any other Seattle receiver that might step into a role that week for like DFS purposes.
Like they don't even have Marquise Goodwin anymore, right? So who's I don't believe in
D. Eskridge. Jake Bobo is the right answer, everybody.
Jake Bobo. Did you see that play where he did the slowest double move of all time and broke the ankles of Deron Bland? And
it was just like I was watching Hopkins against who was that ancient
D'Angelo Hall.
D'Angelo Hall, yeah.
It was pretty funny. It's like watching someone get their ankles broken by like Drew Bledsoe or something. It's crazy. So anyway, I guess I'd have to say, wait, Eskridge is like suspended? What the hell's going on there? I don't know. Maybe our labels. I don't know what is going on there. Anyway, it's pretty much just him. And Eskridge is suspended 6 games. Man, what a stupid pick that was. Who could have known, John? Who could have known that it was a bad idea to take the 25-year-old Western Michigan receiver in the second round over a bunch of really good players? So anyway, it's that third receiver, if not Smith and Jigba, it's got to be like Derek Young, I guess Cody Thompson, maybe Cade Johnson. But yeah, I feel safe ignoring Jake Bobo for some reason.
Okay. All right. Well done. But we had to at least clear that up. But that covers us when it comes to Seattle. Our guy Jake has been waiting for an answer on this one. Kind of an interesting league setup where tight ends and running backs get half-point PPR. Receivers get the standard scoring, so not point per reception. Jake is picking at 5. He's expecting McCaffrey, Justin Jefferson, Austin Eckler, and Jamar Chase to be off the board. So who would you take with the 5th pick? I see Eckler climbs up because of that scoring advantage.
That's tough. Standard for receiver. That's quite a wrench to throw in.
Would you do Kelsey?
I was kind of leaning that way, yeah, because if I'm thinking running back, the next one for me is not Bijan Robinson, it's Nick Chubb. But I'm not expecting Chubb to make it to the second round pick in this league, but maybe Kelsey and whatever the best running back or whatever receiver is better than, starting with Chubb and going wherever you would. But yeah, I think it's between Kelsey and Chubb for me. Tyreek, I guess, if we're talking receivers, but I don't know. I'm a little bit. It's hard for me to think of this through because it's been like literally 8 years since I've thought about how I think about standard scoring, and I am worried about both underweighting it and overreacting to it, and I'm flocking to non-receiver to just for a sense of safety. So with not much confidence, I guess I'd say Chubb, but Kelsey or Chubb is, I guess, how I'd lean.
Yeah, I would go Kelsey. I generally don't love in conventional formats going the Kelsey route in the first round because I feel like it almost forces you to take Mahomes, and then you have to start drafting your receivers and running backs in round 3. So that's the whole thing. But in this league, with that little bit of a tight end premium wrinkle, I think Kelsey would be my guy at number 5. And then if any of Eckler or Jamar Chase were to fall as a result of that and things get shaken up a little bit, I'd be totally happy taking either of those guys at 5.
Yeah, for what it's worth, I have Chubb ahead of Eckler. So, but I also agree with every single thing you said about Kelsey. Like it's a confusing spot to be in, but it's not a bad one, I don't think.
Yeah, you have to know what your roadmap looks like after that. You have to just kind of accept that you're going to be playing catch up at running back and receiver until you get that sorted out. But you don't have to worry about quarterback or tight end for quite some time, which allows you to kind of stockpile things. Before we get on over to our next backfield to break down, got a message from our friends over at Rival Fantasy. If you're looking for a place to play head-to-head fantasy football games without the huge tournaments, salary caps, or complicated game types, then Rival Fantasy is where you want to play NFL this season. From a twist on a classic game with Fantasy Bingo, where players generate a lineup to complete achievements and get bingo, to head-to-head fantasy challenges where you'll pick which of two players will score more fantasy points, this is the best of fantasy sports. For the 2023 NFL season, Rival Fantasy is offering new users a $200 deposit match plus a $25 first play voucher. Rival Fantasy is so confident you'll love the experience, they're giving you money to play out of the gate. Experience the future of fantasy sports on Rival Fantasy and become a rival today. We also got a message from our friends over at Fantasy Sports Knockout. Think you've got fantasy football all figured out? Think again. Introducing Fantasy Sports Knockout, a new Survivor fantasy league that's worth the challenge. A season-long tournament where every week matters. Strategize, draft, survive. High effort with even higher stakes, because who likes losing? Draft your lineup, use any players you want, but be careful. You can only use each player once. The lowest scoring entry is eliminated each week. The concept is simple. Survival is not. Stop losing, start surviving in the only league where skills are tested and strategy pays off. Learn more at survive.fantasysportsknockout.com/RotoWire. Again, that's survive.fantasysportsknockout.com/RotoWire. Fantasy Sports Knockout is available for real money in certain states, but anyone can play in a user-created league. So if you know fantasy, prove it. Visit survive.fantasysportsknockout.com/RotoWire today. You have to check that out. That's a Survivor for fantasy. I'm intrigued. Let's see here, Mario. Let's get on over to Nolens, where the New Orleans Saints play. What are you doing with this backfield? I can't make heads or tails of it. I was hoping that you might be able to do that for me.
So the disclaimer here is I'm, of course, quite low on Jamal Williams. I think he's something like the 50th best running back in the NFL. But because he's an anime character, there's a certain fandom for him, the sense that like, oh, he's pretty good. And I 100% know he is not. He's kind of like a free space on a bingo board in a game where it's like, you know, there's no such he's like a free space in the sense that like he can maybe kind of keep everything else moving along. Like he can't maybe single-handedly destroy an offense, but I hate that sort of that I don't know what you'd call it, that sort of concept of a running back. Like, let's just get someone who doesn't screw up. It is so easy to get someone who helps, and he does not help. He's at best like a light anchor that for some reason they carry around everywhere they go, and he cannot help you get better from scrimmage. It's just 100% off the table, and he's not even a uniquely good short yardage guy. He runs hard. He has to try every snap as desperately, you know, because he can't win on the basis of his talent. So I think going from the super easy, favorable playing circumstances of the Lions offense and their offensive line to any other context at all introduces a near certainty that Williams will average less than 4 yards a carry. And if your running back averages less than 4 yards a carry for any reason other than team offensive collapse, that running back sucks, and I have no real use for them pretty much. So I think that when Alvin Kamara is healthy, even if Alvin Kamara has declined somewhat, which I don't believe necessarily, it's possible, I guess, but the evidence that people point toward, I entirely reject. Like it would have to be on some other basis other than his numbers the last couple of years. I think pretty clearly his issues with the last few years have been the falling apart of the Saints offense around him. And in that sort of transition to failure as an offense, they started taking away his target rate and turning it into carries. So the yards per carry dropping is kind of just as simple as that, in my opinion. They upped his volume. They made his rushing attempts more predictable in the context of the offense overall falling apart. you look at his per target numbers, they're almost exactly the same. And I think there's more insight in that because that's a demonstration of what happens when Kamara is in the open field. And maybe all along it was true that Kamara was never the sort to kind of create his own space. Maybe he needed the space there for him a little bit, but that's largely true of almost all running backs. And at the same time, not many running backs at all can do what Kamara can when that space does exist. So I think if he were slowing down, his per target pass catching returns would have fallen off, and they have not yet. So I think that Kamara has been one of the best values all year, all offseason, I should say. And granted, it's a little easier to say that now that it's a 3-game suspension that we know of, not a 6-game. But I thought, going around the 10th round, he could, even if it were 6 games, if you can get 11 games with Kamara, I think that's probably worth something like an 8th, and now we might get 13 from him. So Williams, I don't look at as anything other than kind of a human shield who takes the short yardage, thankless carries that there might be to go around. If they know whoever's getting this carry is going to get rocked, time for Williams to go into the game. Kamara, we need for making an actual play later on. So granted, that could occur at the goal line, but Kamara, whatever limitations he's ever had, has always been a really good red zone runner. He has long touchdowns as a runner too, but he has tons of short range touchdowns, so many. And that was even with his incredible pass catching production, that touchdown rate was largely the basis for Kamara ever being a first round fantasy pick, because he'd get you 15, 16 touchdowns on like 190 carries. You don't do that when you're bad at running in the red zone, So I am even skeptical that Williams will take a significant amount of short yardage, especially red zone stuff. Because if you need points, you're not putting Williams out there. At best, you're putting Williams out there because you are thinking too highly of him in your offense, and you're probably going to pay the price for it, at which point you can choose to keep not learning the lesson, or you do. And you just put Kamara out there when you need points, and you put Williams out there when you don't. So that's how I see it breaking down. Kendre Miller is an interesting twist. He's a tough prospect for me to evaluate with no testing data. I don't think anyone's good at, certainly at least I'm not good at, looking at tape of especially like a really spread out, almost like Art Briles kind of offense that TCU had. It's tough for me to tell how fast everyone is, especially a running back who running backs don't run at full speed all the time. They rarely do, actually. So it's tough to distinguish good short area burst or something with real speed, because a lot of times what comes across as like speed out of the backfield is just a guy running as hard as he can. Usually running backs aren't running as hard as they can because they're waiting on certain reads before they cut loose. And it's tough to know how that player is going to look, how fast they're going to look in the NFL, where there's definitely more processing to be done. You're not going to have this thing that Kendre Miller would see at TCU, where like there's like 6 players in the box for the defense, and the corners are 25 yards out to either side, and the safeties are 30 yards downfield. That's not going to be happening in the NFL. So he's going to have to sort of see different things, react physically to certain cues that he didn't have in the college level. And I just don't know what to think of him as a result. I wish he had that 40 time and stuff so we could have sort of a standardized measure of his athleticism. So with that said, whereas I think Jamal Williams is just not good, Kendre Miller could be good. And I don't know which way. I don't know how much I believe it, but the production is certainly great. He didn't show anything like bad. I don't know. I don't know any negatives with Kendre Miller that come to mind. But to steal from a player like Kamara, you can't just be passable. You have to be probably one of the better running back talents in the league. So particularly coming back from the meniscus, I know he's fine right now. I know he did good in that preseason game, which was nice to see.
Mm-hmm.
I just happen to think the Saints' plan is to keep Miller mostly in a break glass in case of emergency kind of role, and in the meantime, giving Kamara a ton of work because he costs a lot this year and is pretty clearly either going to get cut, traded, or renegotiated in the offseason. So I would guess Kamara's on another team in 2024, but in the meantime, they're trying to compete. They have no interest in like hiding Kamara. There's nothing. There's only the incentive, if anything, to run him into the ground before they cut him loose after this year.
So what you're saying is Derek Carr is the running back kingmaker.
I guess in the sense that they didn't sign Carr to tank, like they're trying to compete right now. So yeah, if they went into the year with Andy Dalton, I'd be like, oh, are they doing a tank? Are they gonna try to keep Kamara in shrink wrap until the offseason and then cut him so that he's healthy enough to get a big contract as a free agent? Well, that wouldn't matter because they're cutting him. I think they're going to run him into the ground this year and cut him after this year. It's just at that point Miller is the replacement plan, but in the meantime, they're looking to get their money's worth out of Kamara.
Yeah. So I looked. I have no Kamara. So I'm going to need to go ahead and fix that.
It's not a need thing. It's just it's like, especially if you were going kind of light at running back, like zero running back, so to speak. I would much rather have Kamara and Charbonnet as my 1-2 than like James Cook and Rashaad White, especially since the latter two cost more. I'd rather have the cheaper guys straight up, Kamara and Charbonnet, let alone at the particular prices they go.
Yeah. So I'm going to need to rectify this Kamara glaring hole in my portfolio. Let's get on over to Chicago, another just kind of muddy situation. It's sort of like maybe like a poor man's version of the Eagles one where, we're expecting the quarterback to, soak up a decent amount of the rushing share. But unlike Philadelphia, there aren't really like standout talents that you can even delineate the top two in this backfield, or at least the market doesn't seem to be able to do that correctly. And, I sometimes will see Khalil Herbert going inside the 10th round. And it's like, what's going on there? I think there's a lot of hype from draft people when it comes to Rashaad Johnson. So what is your approach when it comes to this Bears backfield? How is it going to shake out over the course of the season?
I have no idea. And I don't think anyone has actually any idea. You'll see certain narratives that kind of claim to know or have strong reason to believe it's going to go this way or that. I think those people are either confused or sort of carnival barking, basically. And I have, of course, come across as a critic of Rashaad Johnson, but I'm a critic of the particular narratives that people are doing these days where they're, it's an environment of fan fiction kind of culture, choose your own adventure type nonsense. And people are projecting like Superman memes basically on Rashaad Johnson, this backup running back who saw the most of his playing time in college against backups and in blowouts, played behind not just Bijan Robinson, but also Keontae Ingram. So I don't understand why so many people are desperately squinting to see some way like, oh, sure, Rashaad Johnson's inevitable. He's going to be the guy who takes
Uncle Ted thinks so. Uncle Ted's on the Rashaad train.
He's a career backup. And so it's really amusing to me that people specifically, to justify the hype with Rashaad Johnson, they say like, well, Priest Holmes backed up Ricky Williams. Okay, Priest Holmes also played behind the best offensive line of all time with the Chiefs. And Ricky Williams, I'm sorry, is a way better prospect than Bijan Robinson. So
hell yeah.
If you really want to go with a case that's like the 1 out of a million exception, that's still a terrible case to even as far as 1 out of whatever the hell it actually is goes. You couldn't find like a much bigger stretch, even with that already ridiculous stretch category that you're starting in. So Rashaad Johnson has a few things going for him that are good. I mean, he's not a bad player. I would take him over like Jamal Williams, like granted that could prove to be wrong. There's totally a possibility that Rashaad Johnson's no better from scrimmage in the NFL than Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams was a better player at BYU than Rashaad Johnson was at Texas. But I do think Johnson has a better tool set than Jamal Williams. Like Jamal Williams, he's not a heavy running back and he's not a short, stout running back, and yet he's kind of dependent on power functions, which I being taller lacking the anchor is not the way you want to play that game. Rashaad Johnson is a bit heavier than Jamal Williams and a bit more explosive at that weight. So I think Rashaad Johnson has more real anchor than Jamal Williams. But the fact is the production in college is not very good. And I know that people will point to, he has this missed tackles forced per attempt. Like this is why more fantasy football people should have to follow baseball. Like, I'm sorry, you want to talk about 80 snap sample size as the basis for changing a guy's conventional grade from like round 6 to round 2? This is crap science, crap math reasoning. Every sort of discipline involved with this is being done at a shoddy level to reach this conclusion. And guess what? The charting sucks. The measure is a made up number, and there's nothing to it. Simple as that. There's nothing to it. Whatever signal there is in this missed tackles forced number that people love so much can be better found in other stats that already existed and are not conjured. So that whole line of reasoning, and it is the main line of reasoning that people push Rashaad Johnson with. All those dynasty Twitter people were just like parrots repeating this line over and over and over. It's a joke. It's nonsense. It's complete gibberish, and there's no reason to take it seriously. So if we're looking at this, the material reality of this all, it's that we have a 4th round backup, a career backup in Rashaad Johnson, who can catch passes, can block, and can run, and is probably a slightly above average raw athlete, but he has no production to indicate a plus skill set. We have Travis Homer, who they're paying for sure to stay on the team, who has demonstrated a passing down skill set already at the NFL. You know, the main calling card for Rashaad Johnson that people try to, aside from the missed tackles force thing, they try to go, oh, well, Deontay Foreman and Khalil Herbert aren't pass catchers. Pass catching and pass blocking is so important nowadays. That's why Rashaad Johnson's going to pull away. That's a case for Travis Homer, then. If you're saying that, it's a case for Travis Homer, not Rashaad Johnson. And I'm not saying go pick Travis Homer. I'm very much not saying that. I'm saying all of these guys are going to play, and everyone's going to be pissed off the whole time. So I'll take Deontay Foreman in best ball, and I'll take maybe Khalil Herbert in best ball if he falls a little bit. But anyone selling you some line about how this guy's going to take over, no, they're all going to be there. They're going to get, guys are going to get nicked up, miss some time with injury. But other than that, they're all going to be there, and everyone's going to be mad the whole time. They're going to be, why is stupid Matt Eberflus giving carries to stupid Deontay Foreman? Don't they know he's got a bad PFF pass blocking grade? Too bad. Doesn't matter. They're all playing. Shut up.
Oh, I can't wait for the Sunday cope. Like week 1 Sunday, just being on Twitter and like if Rashaad's like a healthy scratch or like gets like 1 carry, people are just gonna like clip whatever like doomed from the start play what the Bears might run that day and be like, see, look, this never would have happened if Rashaad was out there.
Look at this play in the 56-21 fourth quarter blowout of the Colorado game. Can Travis Homer do this? That stupid clip that everybody loves to post. I should say there was some doom and gloom from even the big Rashaad heads yesterday because the Bears running back coach said something like, oh yeah, Khalil's probably going to be the starter. Deontay's doing, Deontay Foreman, Treston Ebner's out there doing good. And they named Rashaad Johnson last out of, Herbert, Deontay Foreman, Homer, and Treston Ebner of all people. So I, of course, don't believe Rashaad Johnson is nearly as good as a lot of people believe. But one thing you can certainly take for granted is Treston Ebner's not ahead of Rashaad Johnson. So I would have to concede there's no basis of assuming Travis Homer is either from that statement. There's no way Rashaad Johnson's the 5th running back on the depth chart because Ebner's not making that team.
I did love Treston Ebner in college, but
he's still an interesting like practice squad type, which I assume is what the Bears believe too right now.
Yeah, but beyond that, yeah, it's not going to be that bad for Rashaad. There's just I don't see that this, based on what we know about him and what we know about this team construct. I just have a hard time seeing him, like, even if he somehow gets all this opportunity, really like turning it into much. And I doubt that he ends up having enough volume to be startable on a week-to-week basis in redraft. And I think there's a possibility where maybe he scores in your best ball team, but that's a best ball team that probably isn't doing so hot.
And he's worth picking up in drafting in redraft. I just think it's point blank one of those situations. You need some of those other guys to get hurt before you have any clarity at all.
Yep. So I'm just gonna leave that be. I'd mostly leave that Bears backfield alone. I will take Foreman on occasion if I need a running back
because he's the cheapest
that late. Yeah. No, I'm good with that, and he's got some legitimate NFL production under his belt. Elias wants to know. I'm interested in this too, Mario. Would you rather pick 4th or 12th in a 12-man league this year? So I guess that he's setting his Kentucky Derby style draft slot. 4, I don't really like picking 4, and I do like picking 12. So I think it's pretty easy for me to go 12. I think that there's a clear line with Jefferson, Chase, and McCaffrey being the top 3, and then I think that there's a drop off after that. Whereas 12, like you're positioned so well to go any direction. I think you'll be happy with it if whichever running back you can get. End of the first, early second, and vice versa with the receiver. So I think 12 gives you more flexibility, and I think potentially more value.
I think I agree with that. I love Tyreek Hill. I'd love to have Tyreek Hill shares, but it's the 2nd, 3rd round that looks worse than the 12th round spot. And I love going out of the 1st round with Garrett Wilson, Nick Chubb, something like that. And you're not going to get that caliber of a running back at your 2nd round pick if you have Tyreek at the 4th pick. So, yeah, I like 12. And when you have 3rd round reversal, it's no contest. That 9 through 12 range is really nice in 3rd round reversal.
I find that when I'm picking 12th or 11th, something like that, a Chubb, Garrett Wilson, or Chubb, Devontae Adams start. That's the cojones start. I feel real good about that one.
St. Brown in full point PPR, I think, is really, really good foundational piece. So that's where you're taking those guys.
I've been getting more Devontae Adams recently, and I don't really know why. Maybe it's a little FOMO because
he had 180 targets last year.
I know, and it's just I've been ignoring it for this long. I love the upside with Garrett Wilson. St. Brown, I get less of on half point PPR, but DraftKings is a different story. But Adams, I feel like it's out there in the open, and everyone's so pessimistic about the Raiders. But it's doesn't that mean that the Raiders are going to be playing from behind all the time and needing to throw it, and they have no one to throw to except Devontae Adams? And we know now that if and when Jimmy G goes down, AOC is just going to be throwing bombs. So problem solved.
Yeah, I mean, O'Connell, wow, he could be a rich man's David Blau. It is a little concerning to me, the Hoyer O'Connell stuff. I didn't like O'Connell that much as a prospect. To me, he's just a backup. Could be wrong. If Garoppolo gets hurt, I hope I'm wrong about O'Connell, because it'd be a shame for a player as good as Devontae Adams to waste a year of his career. But if you're asking me to talk you down from Devontae Adams, I'm not really the person to do it. I've also held a lot of anxiety about even going with someone like CeeDee Lamb over him. Garrett Wilson over Adams is easier for me because I see the upside more easily with Wilson, but with CeeDee Lamb, it's more in that Amon-Ra category to me, where it's this is a nice solidifying pick, but I'm not going to get the wide receiver 1 with this pick. Devontae Adams could be the wide receiver 1, and you're right, we might be overstating the risk that he ends up, whatever the worst case scenario we're thinking of is, wide receiver 10 or something. It can't get much worse than that, honestly.
No, I wouldn't think so. Sticking with the Raiders real quick, then we'll hit one more backfield. Jake wants to know how we are feeling. A little temperature check on one Josh Jacobs, because I think he's going to report to the team the week of week 1, but how close to game shape is he? And what does it mean for his ADP? I guess he's what, a mid 4th type of guy at this stage.
I believe he's going 3rd. More around the 3rd, 4th turn kind of thing, and sometimes probably a little earlier in the 3rd round. I'm a little concerned about it. So I have no concern or not much concern about someone like Jonathan Taylor showing up week 1. I think as much as Josh Jacobs clearly is a very hard worker and incredibly tough, he's not the freak athlete that someone that Jonathan Taylor or Nick Chubb are, and B, I think there's just a little bit different. I am totally speculating here. I just think there's a little bit different of a mindset between the two. Like Josh Jacobs, clearly a totally serious football player, works out all the time, clearly stays in great shape. But Jonathan Taylor is one of those guys who I don't know if he didn't have football, his life would be some other sport. Like he's just one of these people who is always in Olympic level shape, and it only can be that way because it's the only explanation for how he's been so productive, especially as a true freshman at Wisconsin. Just stepping onto the field at 18 years old and being a totally good NFL starting running back at that age, like that's basically a neurotic individual. Like he's a neurotically hard worker, and whereas with Jacobs, I worry about him overlooking something more like the stretching or something. Like Jacobs is, I have no doubt pumping iron, keeping his wind good, all that stuff, but I worry about him kind of pulling a hammy or something. And I don't know. I'm not, in large part because Jacobs already has a tendency to get hurt. He has a tendency to play hurt and play extremely well hurt. But I'm worried we're kind of pressing that margin a little bit with a scenario like this. So I'm not going to tell anyone not to take Jacobs because clearly very good player, clearly a steal if he is anywhere near what he was last year. I personally am I guess, just a little too anxious to go there. I could very much regret that, though, for all I know.
Yeah, I've even at the decreased ADP, I just haven't been getting tons of Jacobs. But yeah, so that's where I'm at with him. I think mid like not if I'm picking between him and Najee, I think it becomes a little bit more of an interesting discussion. But where he's going right now, I just tend to never have to really answer that question. Before we round it out, Mario, let's hit one more backfield. Let's go to the nation's capital. Obviously, it's Sam Howell's world, and we're all just living in it. But in the times where Washington does have to run the football, who do you like between Gibson, Robinson, or door number 3?
So I don't believe Brian Robinson can play at all. I think even as backups go, I don't think he's very good. So as a starter, he's pretty much a joke to me. Granted, this is a maybe good cult. He's almost certainly a good culture guy. He's a likable player. There's a reason why the people who work with him are generally fond of him. The problem is there's a big gap between practice and training camp and all that stuff where they kind of have this insulated environment where they're around these players a lot, but they're not getting so much concrete example of what they actually are in the regular season when things actually matter. They don't have a good sense of that, and they get further away from that sense, that understanding, the more time that they have to look at things like, well, look how good Brian Robinson's character is. Look at how hard he's trying in this drill. Trying hard in a drill is good, I guess. It's better than not trying hard in the drill, but it doesn't mean anything at all for the real games. And when real games start, talent matters. Robinson doesn't have it. He tips off the run when he's in the game. He can't run that well. He's a below average runner. And let's just say he's a good pass blocker, whatever. Does that really seem like much use? Does it seem much use for fantasy anyway? If this guy, even if he's playing a lot of passing downs, he's not going to catch that many passes. He's too lethargic. It's too easy to see where Robinson is going every single play. You as a defense, you love seeing Robinson on the field because he can't access these parts of the field. You look around at the field when someone like Kamara's on the field, and you're like, oh crap, we gotta account for absolutely everything almost. When Robinson's on the field, you're like, oh nice, he's going to be funneled right here, and if he doesn't go there, he's not getting it at all, and we don't have to worry about that. Having a player on the field with that kind of dynamic for an offense reduces your offensive sum to something like 10 on 11. And some teams can get away with that. Elite quarterback teams. Patrick Mahomes could get away with Patrick Mahomes had Darrell Williams raking, but with even as someone who's hopeful for Sam Howell, Washington does not have such margins to work with. They are going to pay dearly the more they play Brian Robinson. So what I see happening at worst, at best, as it were, for Brian Robinson is he starts the year and quite simply loses playing time reliably every single passage of time. That any unit of time from there, it gets worse. invariably, because Antonio Gibson's better from scrimmage and is better as a pass catcher, and Chris Rodriguez is so much more talented as a pure runner than Brian Robinson is. So time's almost up, is how I see it for Robinson.
Chris Rodriguez, that guy's a load to bring down. Watched a bit of the streak-breaking game on Monday. I was very sad to see the streak end for my boys, but it was good to see Chris Rodriguez just running dudes over. It's like,
he can run.
I remember that.
Being able to run matters, and Robinson can. Rodriguez can run. Robinson cannot, and it's super obvious in their stats. It's super. You turn on the clips of either of them in college. It's not difficult to tell who's better. It takes sort of like a brainwashing in NFL media and fantasy NFL social media to convince yourself that Robinson has actually anything on Rodriguez. Go ask any SEC defender. Go ask any SEC defensive coordinator. They go, oh no, we hate playing Chris Rodriguez. We like playing against Brian Robinson.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I think that predictability angle when it comes to Robinson is the problem there. So I did a best ball earlier this week, and both Gibson and Robinson went in the 9th round, just a few picks apart. So, I mean, it's just going to be one of those things where you have to pick a side. If you're in on Washington, I'm leaving that backfield alone, basically.
Yeah. I don't have any of them. If I was doing 30-round drafts, I'd take Rodriguez every time. But even as someone who says Gibson over Robinson easily, I am not taking Gibson. I worry about the team being too stupid to use him the right way.
I looked and I typed in Robinson into my exposure, and I saw 15, and I was like, oh no, how? But it was Bijan, so I felt I had a slight panic there that I had 15% Brian Robinson with no recollection of doing it. It's like a memento where I'm tattooing my drafts onto myself every morning, and I got another Robinson share last night.
If you need to do it to keep yourself from to keep yourself from having the horror moment of thinking you drafted Brian Robinson, then you should absolutely get those tattoos or whatever. Write it on ink or whatever it is.
This has good tweet potential. I need to contact someone that actually.
It's not worth the blood pressure spike.
No, it's just simply not. Can't be having that. We got one special request from listener, live viewer James. Quick one, Mario. San Francisco backfield. So obviously McCaffrey's McCaffrey. How are you approaching it afterward? Are you willing to take Elijah Mitchell where he goes, and anyone else to keep an eye on in that backfield?
I still like Elijah Mitchell. I know he's gotten a bunch of injuries, and don't get me wrong, it's not encouraging to see that, but he didn't get hurt at all at Lafayette, or at least I don't remember him missing much time. On the basis of his frame, his weight, there was always reason to think Mitchell had limited volume capacity. So that's something that just, in a way, the injuries being like, oh, that limits his volume capacity. I need to see him get hurt more before I consider this anything more than kind of bad short-term luck, these injuries that he's had. And if Mitchell can play, I mean, he has volume limitations, yes, but per play limitations, he does not. He's one of the best running backs in the league per play. So I like Mitchell. If he keeps falling, I'll keep taking him. Jordan Mason is a pretty good player. He can run at least. I don't have a good sense of what Mason can do as a pass catcher. I don't think Georgia Tech really had room for him because him and Gibbs were there at the same time.
Right.
But Mason has always done well when given the ball, and he's not a bad athlete. He's not a great athlete, but he's pretty good. Certainly a lot better than Tyrion Davis-Price, who cannot play. I'm sorry. I don't care if his training camp reports are better. This is not something we need to take seriously. Kyle Shanahan's evaluation of players is not something we need to take seriously. Tyrion Davis-Price was not worth taking in a 14-round draft. 1988, he's not worth drafting. So if he's going in the 3rd round last year, I don't care. If he's looking better than last year, well, how couldn't he? How could someone be as bad as that was? And even if he is improved, he's only just in that sense getting in the conversation of even being anywhere near someone like Mason, which is still far from someone like Mitchell. So don't care about Tyrion Davis-Price. If McCaffrey and Mitchell and Mason all get hurt, I believe the 49ers would probably be able to find a free agent who is still better than Tyrion Davis-Price, even if they don't know the system. So Yeah, I think Tyrion Davis-Price is going to get cut next year after being a healthy scratch the vast majority of this year.
Yep. So I think, Mitchell, fine where he goes. I definitely endorse getting some shares there, especially with things getting a little bit complicated with the rest of the running back market at that particular stage of the draft these days, some moving parts, some injuries, and so on. But I do like Mitchell. I think that he, like we've talked about previously, can this, running back 2 or whatever, can they scale up? Can they actually be good if they get the opportunity? And I think the answer is, absolutely yes when it comes to Mitchell. Go Raging Cajuns. But that's going to round it out for us here on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Big thanks to our sponsors over at Fantrax, over at Rival Fantasy, and also Fantasy Sports Knockout. For Mario Puig, I'm John McKechnie. Thanks for listening.
Try RotoWire today, free for 10 days. Get our premium tools, rankings, analysis, and breaking news alerts. No credit card required. Go to rotowire.com/try.